That alphabet workbook you bought for your 3-year-old, it's not building their intelligence. It's quietly dismantling something far more precious, something that determines whether learning will feel natural or traumatic for the rest of their life. Every time you sit them down with flashcards before their brain is ready, you're activating a threat response that floods their developing neurons with stress hormones. This isn't about being a helicopter parent or pushing too hard. This is about neuroscience. What's happening inside their brain during those ABC drills will affect their anxiety levels at 15, their ability to handle failure at 25, and even the physical structure of their prefrontal cortex. But here's what no one tells you. If you understand what's really happening before age 5, you can protect their brain instead of accidentally harming it.
Look at that child in the left image. Really look. The tears streaming down their face, the hand pressed against their forehead in a gesture of overwhelm that no 3-year-old should know. The open workbook on the table, pages filled with letters that mean nothing to a brain not yet wired to decode them. This isn't a tantrum. This isn't defiance. This is a nervous system in distress. While that parent believes they're giving their child an advantage, something devastating is unfolding inside that small skull. The amygdala, the brain's ancient alarm system, has detected a threat, not a physical danger, but something the developing brain interprets as equally terrifying, a task it cannot complete, expectations it cannot meet, pressure it cannot escape. Within seconds, the hypothalamus triggers a cascade. Cortisol floods the bloodstream, the heart rate spikes, and the prefrontal cortex, that precious region responsible for learning, reasoning, and emotional regulation, begins to shut down. Dr. Bruce Perry from the Child Trauma Academy has spent decades mapping what happens to children's brains under chronic stress. His research reveals something parents desperately need to understand. When a young child experiences repeated academic pressure before they're developmentally ready, their brain doesn't adapt and grow stronger, it reorganizes around fear. The hippocampus, critical for memory formation, actually shrinks under sustained cortisol exposure. Neural pathways that should be building curiosity and wonder instead wire for anxiety and avoidance. This isn't speculation, this is neuroscience. Children who are pushed into formal academics before age 5 show measurably higher rates of anxiety disorders by age 10. They develop what researchers call learned helplessness, a deep-seated belief that effort doesn't matter because failure is inevitable. Their prefrontal cortex, which should be strengthening its executive function capabilities, instead shows reduced connectivity. The very organ we're trying to develop becomes compromised by our methods. And yet our culture screams the opposite message. Preschools advertise advanced curricula. Apps promise to make babies smarter. Parents panic if their 4-year-old can't write their name while the neighbor's child can. We've bought into a seductive lie that earlier equals better, that pushing equals progress, that a child struggling through flashcards is a child getting ahead. But neuroscience doesn't care about our cultural anxieties. The brain develops on its own timeline, and that timeline is non-negotiable. Forcing alphabet recognition before the neural architecture is ready doesn't accelerate development, it derails it. Every tear shed over a workbook is a stress response that rewires the brain for fear rather than curiosity. Every frustrated session at the table is teaching that child one devastating lesson: learning hurts. Here's what most parents don't know about the brain between birth and age 5. It's not designed to learn academics. It's designed to learn survival. For millions of years, the human brain has evolved with one primary directive in those early years: figure out who keeps you safe, what your environment demands, and how to regulate the overwhelm of simply being alive. Reading comes later. Math comes later. First, the brain must answer a more fundamental question: am I safe?
This is why the architecture develops from the bottom up. The brainstem and limbic system, the regions governing stress response and emotional regulation, build their circuitry first. They're supposed to become strong and stable during these years, creating a foundation of calm that the higher thinking regions will later rest upon. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reading, writing, and complex reasoning, doesn't even begin its major development phase until around age 5. Trying to force it into service earlier is like demanding a foundation hold up a house before the concrete has cured. When you sit a 3-year-old down with alphabet flashcards, their primitive brain doesn't recognize this as learning. It recognizes a threat. The amygdala activates, cortisol releases, and here's the critical part. Cortisol is toxic to the developing hippocampus. Research from the University of Minnesota shows that chronic cortisol exposure during early childhood literally reduces hippocampal volume, the very structure essential for memory and learning. You're trying to teach letters while simultaneously damaging the organ that will eventually need to remember them. The brain has critical periods, windows when specific capacities are meant to develop. From birth to age 5, that window is wide open for emotional regulation, attachment security, and stress response calibration. The window for formal literacy, it doesn't even crack open until around age 6 or 7. Dr. Peter Gray's research demonstrates that children who learn to read at 7 show identical comprehension and literacy skills by age 11 as children who were taught at 4. The early readers gain nothing, but they often lose something precious. Their natural love of learning gets replaced by performance anxiety. This is the sequence nature intended. First, build the emotional scaffolding. Let the child learn that the world is safe, that adults are responsive, that emotions can be felt and managed. Once that foundation is solid, once the lower brain regions are stable and secure, then the prefrontal cortex comes online naturally, hungrily, ready to absorb symbols and numbers with ease. But when we reverse this order, when we force cognitive tasks onto a brain still building its emotional foundation, we don't accelerate development, we interrupt it. The brain abandons its crucial work of learning safety and regulation because it's forced into survival mode, trying desperately to meet demands it wasn't designed to handle yet. Every letter drilled is a day of emotional architecture left unbuilt.
Now look at both images side by side. On the left, that crying child hunched over the workbook, alone at the table, small body rigid with stress. Notice the isolation. Notice how the book sits between them and any human warmth. Notice how the tears fall onto pages that promise progress but deliver only pain. This is a brain in lockdown mode. The amygdala is screaming. The prefrontal cortex has gone offline. Nothing is being learned here except one message: I am not enough. Now shift your eyes to the right. A different child, wrapped in their parents' arms, eyes peacefully closed, body completely relaxed into the embrace. Golden sunlight, natural surroundings, no agenda, no performance, no pressure. Just presence, just safety, just connection. Look at the parent's hand, gentle and protective on the child's back. Look at the child's face, serene and secure. This doesn't look like education, does it? It looks like love, and that's exactly the point. Here's the question that should stop every parent in their tracks. Which brain is actually building the architecture for intelligence? Which child's neural pathways are forming stronger, faster, more capable of future learning? The one drilling letters through tears, or the one feeling absolute safety in another human's arms? The science is unequivocal. The child in the embrace is developing at a neurological speed the stressed child cannot match.
Dr. Alan Shore at UCLA has spent his career mapping how secure attachment literally builds brain structure. When a child feels safe, when they're held and attuned to, their brain releases oxytocin and dopamine. These neurochemicals don't just feel good, they actively construct neural pathways. The right hemisphere, responsible for emotional intelligence and stress regulation, develops its densest connectivity during moments exactly like this: body-to-body contact, mutual gaze, responsive presence. In that embrace, the child's vagus nerve is being toned, their window of tolerance is expanding, their capacity to handle future challenges is strengthening. The orbitofrontal cortex, which governs decision-making and impulse control, is forming crucial connections to the limbic system. The hippocampus, free from cortisol's toxic effects, is building robust memory networks. This child's brain is doing precisely what it's supposed to do at this age, learning that the world is safe enough to explore, that adults are trustworthy enough to depend on, that feelings can be regulated through connection. Meanwhile, the child on the left is learning that achievement matters more than comfort, that their distress should be ignored in service of progress, that love is conditional on performance. Their brain is wiring for a very different future. Not stupidity versus intelligence, dysregulation versus regulation, fear versus security. A brain organized around threat versus a brain organized around trust. The child in the hug isn't falling behind, they're building the only foundation that makes all future learning possible.
So, what do you actually do instead? How do you build a brain like the child in the embrace rather than the child at the table? It comes down to 5 fundamental shifts that protect your child's developing neurology while setting the stage for effortless learning later. First, replace those alphabet drills with emotional co-regulation. When your 3-year-old melts down, instead of redirecting them to their ABCs, get down on their level and say, "I see you're feeling really big feelings right now. Is it frustration? Sadness? Let's figure it out together." You're teaching them to name emotions, which activates the prefrontal cortex far more powerfully than naming letters ever could. Dr. John Gottman's research shows that children who learn emotional vocabulary early score higher on every measure of intelligence by age 8. You're literally building the brain's executive function through feelings, not phonics. Second, prioritize sensory play over structured learning. Give your child mud, water, sand, blocks. Let them pour, squeeze, stack, and destroy. This isn't frivolous. This is how spatial reasoning develops. This is how the brain learns cause and effect, problem solving, and persistence. Cambridge University's research confirms that children who engage in open-ended play show stronger mathematical thinking later than children who did worksheets early. The neurons being wired through sensory exploration create the architecture that formal academics will eventually need. Third, respond to stress signals immediately. The moment you see your child's face scrunch in frustration during any activity, stop. Put down the book, the puzzle, whatever is causing distress. Reconnect. Make eye contact. Offer your presence. Dr. Bruce Perry calls this regulate, relate, then reason. A dysregulated child cannot learn anything except that their discomfort doesn't matter. But a child who experiences consistent co-regulation learns their most important lesson. I can return to calm and someone will help me get there. Fourth, create language-rich environments naturally. Forget flashcards. Tell stories while you cook. Sing songs in the car. Narrate your day. I'm chopping the red pepper now. Hear that crunchy sound? This organic language exposure builds vocabulary faster and more durably than any app or workbook. Your voice, your presence, your words woven into real life. This is how the language centers of the brain truly flourish. Fifth, trust developmental timing. Stop watching the calendar, start watching your child.
when they show genuine curiosity about letters, when they ask, "What does that sign say?" when readiness emerges naturally, then in age. Studies from New Zealand tracking children into adolescence found zero academic difference between early and later readers, but the later readers showed significantly less anxiety and more intrinsic motivation. Let the brain signal when it's ready. Look at that peaceful child in the embrace. That's what readiness looks like, a nervous system so secure it's hungry to explore. If you're sitting here with a sinking feeling in your stomach, wondering how many times you've been the parent with the workbook instead of the parent with the embrace, breathe. This isn't about guilt. It's about information you didn't have until now. And here's what neuroscience wants you to know. It's not too late. The brain possesses something remarkable called plasticity, the ability to rewire itself throughout childhood and even into adulthood. Those stress pathways that formed during forced academics, they're not permanent. Dr. Dan Siegel's research on neuroplasticity shows that consistent, responsive connection can actually repair earlier damage. Every time you choose attunement over achievement going forward, you're giving your child's brain the opportunity to build new circuitry, to learn that safety is possible, that learning doesn't have to hurt. And let's be honest about why you pushed in the first place. You weren't trying to harm your child. You were terrified of failing them. You saw other kids reading early and panicked. You got messages from preschools, from parenting groups, from well-meaning relatives that your child needed to keep up, get ahead, start now. Our entire culture is screaming that earlier is better, and you simply believed what everyone around you seemed to know. That's not poor parenting, that's being human in a society that has forgotten how children's brains actually work. But now you have different information. Now you can make a different choice. The goal isn't to raise the earliest reader or the fastest counter. The goal is to raise a human being whose brain is wired for resilience, whose nervous system knows how to regulate, whose sense of self isn't dependent on performance. Brain health over early achievement, security over skills, connection over curriculum. These aren't nice ideas, they're neurological necessities. Here's the truth that should lift the weight off your shoulders. Connection heals. Every single time you put down the flashcards and pick up your child instead, you're sending a powerful message to their developing brain. Every time you validate their frustration rather than push through it, you're rewiring their stress response. Every time you choose play over productivity, presence over pressure, you're giving their hippocampus a chance to recover, their amygdala a chance to calm, their prefrontal cortex the secure foundation it needs to eventually thrive. That child in the embrace didn't get there because their parent did everything perfectly from day one. They got there because someone made the decision, perhaps today, perhaps yesterday, to prioritize what actually matters. You can be that parent right now. Close the workbook, sit on the floor, open your arms. Your child's brain is waiting, ready to reorganize around safety instead of fear, ready to learn that love isn't conditional on letters, ready to build the architecture that makes all future learning not just possible, but joyful. It's not too late. It's exactly the right time to begin again. Look at those two images one final time. The crying child, alone with their workbook, learning that achievement matters more than their tears. The peaceful child, wrapped in arms, learning that they matter more than any achievement. Two different childhoods, two different brain architectures, two completely different futures unfolding from this single moment. Which child do you want to raise? Not which child can recite the alphabet first, but which child will face their first real failure at 12 and know how to recover? Which child will handle rejection, navigate complex emotions, build meaningful relationships, persist through difficulty? Which child's brain is being wired for the challenges that actually matter? You can't force a flower to bloom by pulling its petals. You can only damage what was already trying to unfold in its own time. A gardener doesn't stand over a seed screaming, "Grow faster." They provide what the seed actually needs: rich soil, water, sunlight, patience. Your child's brain is that seed. It has its own timeline, its own sequence, its own wisdom about when to reach for letters and numbers. Your job isn't to force the bloom, it's to provide the conditions that make blooming inevitable. And here's the promise that every parent needs to hear. When brains develop naturally, when the foundation is laid with connection instead of pressure, learning doesn't just happen, it becomes joy. The 7-year-old who learned to read on their own timeline experiences books as magic, not torture. The 8-year-old whose early years were spent in play approaches math problems with curiosity, not dread. The adolescent whose childhood prioritized emotional safety over early achievement has the resilience to handle whatever life throws at them. This isn't about delaying success. This is about ensuring it. So here's your choice, the one you'll make again tomorrow and the next day and every day until your child is 5. Choose connection over curriculum. Choose brain health over benchmarks. Choose the embrace over the workbook. Choose to be the parent whose child learns that safety comes first, that emotions matter, that love isn't something you earn through performance. Choose to build a brain organized around trust instead of threat. Put down the flashcards, close the workbook, get down on the floor where your child is, open your arms. Let their developing brain feel what it actually needs to feel. I am safe. I am seen. I am enough exactly as I am. Everything else, all the learning, all the achievement, all the skills they'll ever need, it all flows from this one foundation. And you're the one who builds it, not with alphabet drills, but with presence, not with pressure, but with patience, not with lessons, but with love. Thank you for watching. Your child's brain is counting on you to choose wisely.